Because a male was allowed to fraudulently change his passport, a man was able to get in the boxing ring at the Olympics, the pinnacle of sport, and win an Olympic gold medal. Same thing with this new NCAA policy that has been now released. NCAA President Charlie Baker claiming to get in line with President Trump's really beautifully and thoroughly written executive order. But of course, this policy, it resorts back to birth certificates, which, same thing, they can be made fraudulent or honestly could have mistakes on them. I actually have a friend, one of my dear friends, he has a passport that says female on it because his doctor at birth literally just made a mistake in writing his passport. So absolutely. And you just mentioned something that
I'm sure all of his buddies have had a lot of fun with that one over the years, because I certainly would have. One of my, I played college sports. We would have had a lot of fun with that one. And but look, it's really actually important, this whole notion, and people brush it aside like it's just a choice. But if you boil our official documents down to choice, then we have nothing left. The rule of law becomes effectively meaningless. And that part about the NCAA, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as somebody, again, who was involved with NCAA athletics, the NCAA has never met a woke direction it doesn't want to go, or a fight they don't want to avoid if it means standing up to do the right thing. So, of course, they want to be able to hide behind the president's executive order and say, oh, yeah, we're doing it too, but then leave the door wide open for continued abuse and discretion by universities, which are not paragon of common sense.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gains for Girls podcast. Very excited that you are here and you are tuned in. You can check out all things Gains for Girls at OutKick.com or anywhere where you get your podcasts. You can check it out at Spotify, Apple. Make sure to share these episodes far and wide because it really does help. A few weeks ago, we had a conversation with Kim Jones surrounding the NCAA policy and their qualifications of sex, which, of course, was a birth certificate, which is a paper document that can be made fraudulent or could simply have a mistake. Today, we're going to be talking about something similar, but it's a piece of legislation introduced by a representative in Congress called the Passport Sanity Act. This was introduced by Representative Chip Roy. He says, radical gender ideology must be eliminated from every facet of the American government, root and branch. Passports exist to protect our national security by verifying the identity of those who exit and re-enter our country. And that is why they need to be grounded in reality. They are not a political delivery system to push a false notion that goes against the fact that there are only two genders in existence. And those, of course, are male and female. So very, very excited for this conversation here. Again, this policy sounds a lot like the executive order that President Trump signed declaring there are only two sexes. So watch this episode here with Congressman Chip Roy. Well, Congressman Roy, thank you for joining the Gains for Girls podcast. I wanted to talk to you today about this new piece of legislation that you have recently reintroduced, the Passport Sanity Act, aiming to remove radical gender ideology from U.S. passports. So just take a second and elaborate on the specific changes of this legislative proposal.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not sure how your head doesn't explode when you're out speaking about all these things, when you actually have to use the words like radical gender ideology with passports, right? Like, if you ever just put that in perspective, you think about where we are as a society, that's where we stand, which is absolutely ridiculous. But also, thank you for all you've done on this issue and continue to do. As a proud father of both a son and a daughter, I appreciate what you're doing for them in that sanity. Yeah, the passport issue. So last year, maybe the year before, I introduced legislation with J.D. Vance, of all people. J.D. was in the Senate at the time, of course, to do the radical notion that our passport should basically just have male, female, man, woman, the biological reality. And so we introduced legislation to do that because, the Biden administration was trying to make our passports into a, social remake experiment. And we introduced that legislation. And of course, God bless President Trump and one of the, 8 bajillion executive orders that he's carried out, along with Marco Rubio implementing it over in the State Department. They're now doing that with respect to passports. But we have the legislation that I reintroduced, the one that I did with JD last Congress, that would make it permanent, right? We in Congress need to make this stuff permanent so a future Biden administration can't make these ridiculous policies a nightmare again.
That's it. That's it. And that's something that I've really, really tried to communicate with people, because I think your average American, maybe your average conservative, they see President Trump in office and they see all of these executive orders being signed, and they kind of wipe their hands and think, look, the war on woke has been won. It's done. But you're exactly right. We need to get things through both legislative chambers, and it certainly does not absolve the states of doing what they need to do and can be overturned. These executive orders, they can be overturned just as quickly as they were put in place. And to your point, my head does want to explode all of the time in engaging in these conversations. I've wanted to ask those people who disagree with the fact that there are only two sexes, what are the other ones? In your statement, you mentioned that passports should be grounded in reality, and not serve as political delivery systems. And so in 2022, you introduced this. Why did you believe it was necessary? And again, to revisit it now.
Well, I mean, importantly, we called it the Passport Sanity Act because it is, in fact, insane to do otherwise. But to your point, and now a moment of seriousness, and this is a serious issue. Passports are critical with respect to our identification and who we are. And it matters, obviously, for going overseas and coming in and out of our country. But we allow passports to be used, obviously, for voting and for all manners of identification. And when you start trying to turn this into, essentially, like I said, a social engineering experiment, then you devalue everything it means to identify who we are. And you start politicizing the very basic services of government, which we shouldn't do. Government should be serving a very tight, focused function and do it effectively and efficiently, right? I mean, that's kind of what DOGE ultimately should be about. Government constitution is supposed to be focused on securing the country, doing the basics. Our state, government is supposed to do roads and schools and cops and, making sure you got, emergency services. And this is turning everything upside down. So we want to get things back to basics, right? I mean, President Trump said it well when he said common sense. That's what we want. Is we want common sense restored. That's why it's called the Passport Sanity Act. It matters that we're able to identify people directly as who they are, and not transform everything we do in government to, some sort of small group at Harvard or Yale or something.
That's right. And we see what happens when you can change your passport, because actually a prime example of this, and relating it to the issue that I find myself speaking about most, is the issue of men and women's sports. Because a male was allowed to fraudulently change his passport, a man was able to get in the boxing ring at the Olympics, the pinnacle of sport, and win an Olympic gold medal. Same thing with this new NCAA policy that has been now released. NCAA President Charlie Baker claiming to get in line with President Trump's really beautifully and thoroughly written executive order. But of course, this policy, it resorts back to birth certificates, which, same thing, they can be made fraudulent or honestly could have mistakes on them. I actually have a friend, one of my dear friends, he has a passport that says female on it because his doctor at birth literally just made a mistake in writing his passport. So absolutely. And you just mentioned something that I'm
sure all of his buddies have had a lot of fun with that one over the years, because I certainly would have. One of my, played college sports. We would have had a lot of fun with that one. And but look, it's really actually important, this whole notion, and people brush it aside like it's just a choice. But if you boil our official documents down to choice, then we have nothing left. The rule of law becomes effectively meaningless. And that part about the NCAA, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as somebody, again, who was involved with NCAA athletics, the NCAA has never met a woke direction it doesn't want to go, or a fight they don't want to avoid if it means standing up to do the right thing. So, of course, they want to be able to hide behind the president's executive order and say, oh, yeah, we're doing it too, but then leave the door wide open for continued abuse and discretion by universities, which are not paragon of common sense. And so we need to have some leadership there. Maybe they should focus on fixing the disaster that is NIL, but I'll save that for a different podcast.
No, it's so true. And actually, your home state, Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton was the first Attorney General to ultimately issue a temporary injunction to the NCAA to prevent this policy from taking place. So we appreciate his leadership. You've been one of the few, Congressman Roy, who is willing to criticize both parties at times, which I admire. I think that is raw. I think it is certainly needed. What do you think needs to change within the Republican Party for it to better serve Americans?
Well, I mean, of course, I could touch on a whole lot of different issues, but even within the realm of the space we're talking about here, Republicans just need to lead and not be afraid. I've got a lot of colleagues who are in districts that are, we'll call them tighter than mine, right? They're closer to even distribution between Republican and Democrat. I get the difficulty of elections. My first two election cycles, remember, I represent Austin, Texas, which is a pretty liberal city, but I used to represent downtown Austin. My district was about an R plus 3 or 4 district, meaning it was very competitive. But I stuck to my guns. I was an outspoken conservative, a limited government conservative, and you could go win. But you got to have the willingness to go make the argument and make the case to people. And that would be what I would argue Republicans need to do. And on issues like this, you can't just shrug it off as like, oh, but those are social issues. We shouldn't talk about them. Culture is who we are. It's a reflection of who we are as a people. When JD talks about immigration, for example, and you talk about who we are as a country, and that we are in fact a sovereign nation and the rule of law matters, it's because that's true. And if we can't stand up and defend the country, defend the people, defend that there is man and woman, defend that life is precious, it doesn't mean that there aren't circumstances that we all as Christians or, people of faith generally don't look and say, hey, there's something, an exception there or something we want to do to help somebody. But as a rule, if we're not trying to stand up and protect innocent life, recognize common sense, build our communities around families, husbands and wives, and do the right thing, then why are we in this business? So that's what my advice is to Republicans. Don't shy away from it. If you want to, reduce the deficit, you're going to have to go cut some spending and have some hard conversations. If you want to save the country, you're going to have to take tough stances. If you want a secure border, you're going to have to tell some people no. That's just what it is, like being a parent. You just have to do it.
You guys are parents to the rest of Americans. Look, last thing I want to ask you about, since I was just in your home state of Texas celebrating the introduction of HB3, which relates to the establishment of an educational savings account, essentially a universal school choice bill. Is this a good move for Texas and for Texas families?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's an issue I feel pretty strongly about. I grew up going public school, K through law school. I never went to a private school, but schools have changed. And I want my kids to be able to go to a school where they can pray, where they can learn about God, where they can study classical education so they can go to a classical Christian school. Now, we can muddle through. It hurts our budget to do it, but we can muddle through. There's a lot of Americans who can't, but they're stuck in a school system that is against their values, against what they believe. It may be failing academically. So, of course, we should take tax dollars and give parents the ability to have choice so their children can have the best shot and a good education. So HB3, that's a good, I think, closer to true universal choice bill. There's a Senate bill in Texas, which I think is a step at least towards, choice. But I prefer the House approach of getting closer to universal choice. I think it's important to have a broad approach to it, and it's important to shake things up. We spend so much money in the public education establishment. We give money to administrators, bureaucrats, the vice president of woke ideology, and we need to break all that down. And competition is the best medicine, and giving people the ability to go to a school that shares their values.
Agreed. Last thing, actually, what else are you working on at the moment?
Well, you may have heard we had this whole big dust up over the budget last night. We passed a budget in the House and sent it over to the Senate. It's a step forward. I don't think it gets the job done fully. We've got more work to do, but it does reduce spending and frees up some space for some tax cuts to make sure that we can make sure the American people are helped. That's important. We got to get Tom Homan the resources he needs to finish securing the border and to remove people who need to be removed. But look, things are trending in the right direction as a direct consequence of the president and his leadership. I just hope we can all kind of come together and get this budget done and finish the job. So that's what we're focused on at the moment.
We'll see, right? But now to your point, we finally have the ability to. So it's what we do with it. So we'll be watching. We'll be cheering you on. As always, very grateful for you and for your friendship. You're someone who really I feel like I can look to for advice, and I just admire you. So thank you, Congressman Roy.
Well, the feeling's mutual. Riley, you made a big difference. And I know you didn't think you were going to be doing this a few years back when you were in Kentucky and you were swimming. But, now you're out there and you're leading and you're helping shape society. And God has a plan for us. You never know exactly what it is. I didn't know I was going to have cancer 13 years ago and then get through it. And then, now have a chance to be in Congress. And, you just walk through the doors God opens for you. And God bless you for doing it.
It's what you do. It's all we can do as Christians. So thank you.
Thanks, Riley.
Thank you guys for tuning in to the Gains for Girls podcast. As always, very grateful that you're here. Again, be sure to share these episodes. Check us out at OutKick.com. That's where you can find all things Gains for Girls, and we will see you again next week. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. The fight to save women's sports and restore common sense is far from over, and I continue the conversation every week. So make sure to catch more content over here and subscribe to OutKick so you don't miss a thing.